All right. Well, it's been a long day. But I've got some Lagavulin, and I've got a wonderful book. So I think we should continue this. Hopefully my voice will be louder than it was last time. I'll make sure to stay closer to the mic. And let's see how far we get. Chapter 12. Sometimes you see a kite so high, so wise it almost knows the wind. It travels, then chooses to land in one spot and no other, and no matter how hard you yank, run this way or that, it will simply break its cord, seek its resting place, and bring you blood-mouthed, running. Jim, wait for me! So now Jim was the kite. The wild twine cut, and whatever wisdom was taking him away from Will, who could only run earthbound after one so high and dark, silent and suddenly strange. Jim, here I come! And running, Will thought, boy, it's the same old thing. I talk, Jim runs. I tilt stones, Jim grabs the cold junk under the stones, and lickety-split. I climb hills, and Jim yells off church steeples. I got a bank account, Jim's got the hair on his head, the yell in his mouth, and the shirt on his back, and the tennis shoes on his feet. How come I think he's richer? Because, Will thought, I sit on a rock in the sun, and old Jim, he prickles his arm hairs by moonlight and dances with hop-toads. I tend cows. Jim tames Gila monsters. Fool! I yell at Jim. Coward! He yells back. And here we go. And they ran from town, across fields, and both froze under a rail bridge with the moon ready beyond the hills and the meadows trembling with fur of dew. Wham! The carnival train thundered the bridge. The calliope wailed. There's no one playing it, Jim stared up. Jim, no jokes. Mother's honor, look! Going away, away, the calliope pipes shimmered, with star explosions, but no one sat at the high keyboard. The wind, sluicing the ice water in the pipes, made the music. The boys ran. The train curved away, gonging its undersea funeral bell, sunk, rusted, green-mossed, tolling, tolling. Then the engine whistle blew a great steam whiff, and Will broke out in pearls of ice. Way late at night, Will had heard, how often, train whistles jetting steam along the rim of sleep, forlorn, alone, and far, no matter how near they came. Sometimes he woke to find tears on his cheeks, asked why, lay back, listened, and thought, yes, they make me cry. Going east, going west, the trains are far gone. In country deeps they drown in tides of sleep that escape the towns. What? I got a cat. A cat yelling at me. You gonna come up here? You can come up here. Come on. There he comes. All right. The appearance of Gulliver. You know he's got to show his face eventually. He's got to bother my mic. Mm-hmm. And check out the book. Yeah. You're interrupting my story time. You're lucky that all of my friends like you, so I don't have to edit you out. Because that would be very difficult for me, and then I wouldn't let you be here. Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you be good? Yes, they make me cry. Going east, going west, the trains have far gone in deep country deeps. Far gone in country deeps, they drowned in tides of sleep that escaped the towns. Those trains and their grieving sounds were lost forever between stations, not remembering where they had been, not guessing where they might go, exhaling their last pale breaths over the horizon, gone. So it was with all trains, ever. Yet this train's whistle. The wails of a lifetime were gathered in it from other nights and other slumbering years, the howl of moon-dreamed dogs, the seep of river-cold winds, through January porch screens which stopped the blood, 1,000 fire sirens weeping, or worse. The outgone shreds of breath, the protests of 1 billion people dead or dying, not wanting to be dead, their groans, their sighs, burst over the earth. Tears jumped to Will's eyes. He lurched. He knelt. He pretended to lace one shoe. But then he saw Jim's hands clap his ears, his eyes wet too. The whistle screamed. Jim screamed against the scream. The whistle shrieked. Will shrieked against the shriek. Then the billion voices ceased, instantly, as if the train had plunged into a firestorm off the earth. The train skimmed on a softly slithering, black pennants fluttering, black confetti, lost on its own sick sweet candy wind down the hill, with the boys pursuing, the air so cold they ate ice cream with each breath. They climbed a last rise to look down. "Boy," whispered Jim. The meadow had pulled off into Rolf's moon meadow, so called because the town couples came out to see the moon rise here over a land so wide, so long, it was like an inland sea, filled with grass in spring or hay in late summer or snow in winter. It was fine walking here, along its crisp shore with the moon coming up to tremble in its tides. Well, the carnival train was crouched there now, in the autumn grass on the old rail spur near the woods, and the boys crept and lay down under a bush, waiting. "It's so quiet," whispered Will. The train just stood in the middle of the dry autumn field. No one in the locomotive, no one in the tender, no one in any of the cars behind, all black under the moon, and just the small sounds of its metal cooling, ticking on the rails. "St," said Jim. "I feel them moving in there." Will felt the cat fuzz on his body bramble up by the thousands. "You think they mind us watching?" "Maybe," said Jim happily. "Then why the noisy calliope?" "When I figure that," Jim smiled, "I'll tell you. Look." Whisper. As if exhaling itself straight down from the sky, a vast moss-green balloon touched the moon. It hovered 200 yards above and away, quietly riding the wind. The basket under the balloon. Someone's in it. But then a tall man stepped down from the train caboose platform, like a captain assaying the tidal weathers of this inland sea. A dark suit, shadow-faced, he wandered to the center of the meadow, his shirt as black as the gloved hands he now stretched to the sky. He gestured once, and the train came to life. At first a head lifted in one window, then an arm, then another head, like a puppet in a marionette theater. Suddenly 2 men in black were carrying a dark tent pole out across the hissing grass. It was the silence that made Will pull back, even as Jim leaned forward, eyes moon-bright. A carnival should be all growls, roars like timberlands stacked, bundled, rolled and crashed, great explosions of lion dust, men ablaze with working anger, pop bottles jangling, horse buckles shivering, engines and elephants in full stampede through rains of sweat while zebras neighed and trembled like cage trapped in cage. But this was like old movies. The silent theater haunted with black and white ghosts, silvery mouths opening to let moonlight smoke out, gestures made. In silence, so hushed you could hear the wind fizz the hair on your cheeks. More shadows rustled from the train, passing the animal cages where darkness prowled with unlit eyes, and the calliope stood mute, save for the faintest idiot tune the breeze piped wandering up the flutes. The ringmaster stood in the middle of the land. The balloon, like a vast moldy green cheese, stood fixed to the sky. Then darkness came. The last thing Will saw was the balloon swooping down as clouds covered the moon. In the night he felt the men rush to unseen tasks. He sensed the balloon like a great fat spider fiddling with lines and poles, rearing a tapestry in the sky. The clouds arose. The balloon sifted up. In the meadow stood the skeleton main poles and wires of the main tent, waiting for its canvas skin. More clouds poured over the white moon. Shadowed, Will shivered. He heard Jim crawling forward, seized his ankle, felt him stiffen. "Wait," said Will. "They're bringing out the canvas." "No," said Jim. "Oh, no." For somehow instead they both knew the wires high flung on the poles were catching swift clouds, ripping them free from the wind in streamers, which made, stitched and sewn by some... Let me start that over. For somehow instead they both knew the wires high flung on the poles were catching swift clouds, ripping them free from the wind in streamers which, stitched and sewn by some great monster shadow, made canvas and more canvas as the tent took shape. At last there was the clear water sound of vast flags blowing. The motion stopped. The darkness within darkness lay still. Will lay, eyes shut, hearing the beat of great oil-black wings as if a huge, ancient bird had drummed down to live, to breathe, to survive in the night meadow. The clouds blew away. The balloon was gone. The men were gone. The tents rippled like black rain on their poles. Suddenly it seemed a long way to town. Instinctively, Will glanced behind himself. Nothing but grass and whispers. Slowly he looked back at the silent, dark, seemingly empty tents. "I don't like it," he said. Jim could not tear his eyes away. "Yeah," he whispered. "Yeah." Will stood up. Jim lay on the earth. "Jim," said Will. Jim jerked his head as if slapped. He was on his knees. He swayed up. His body turned, but his eyes were fastened to those black flags, the great sideshow sign swarming with unguessed wings, horns, and demon smiles. A bird screamed. Jim jumped. Jim gasped. Cloud shadows panicked them over to the hills to the edge of town. From there, the two boys ran alone. Chapter 13. The air was cold, blowing through the wide open library window. Charles Holloway stood there for a long time. Now he quickened. Along the street below fled two shadows, two boys above them, matching shadow stride for stride. They softly printed the night air with treads. "Jim!" cried the old man. "Will!" But not out loud. The boys went away toward home. Charles Holloway looked out into the country, wandering alone in the library, letting his broom tell him things no one else could hear. He had heard the whistle and the disjointed Calliope hymns. 3, he said now, half aloud. 3 in the morning. In the meadow, the tents, the carnival waited for someone, anyone, to wade along the grassy surf. The great tents filled like bellows. They softly issued forth exhalations of air that smelled like ancient yellow beasts. But only the moon looked in at the hollow dark, the deep caverns. Outside, night beasts hung in mid-gallop on the carousel. Beyond lay fathoms of mere maze, which housed a multifold series of empty vanities, one wave on another, still, serene, slivered with age, white with time. Any shadow at the entrance might stir reverberations, the color of fright, unraveled deep buried moons. If a man stood there, would he see himself unfolded away 1,000,000,000 times to eternity? Would 1,000,000,000 images look back, each face, and the face after, and the face after that, old, older, oldest? Would he find himself lost in a fine dust, away off deep down there, not 50, but 60, not 60, but 70, not 70, but 80, 90, 99 years old? The maze did not ask. The maze did not tell. It simply stood and waited like a great Arctic flow. 3 o'clock. Charles Holloway was cold. His skin was suddenly a lizard skin. His stomach, filled with blood, turned to rust. His mouth tasted of night damps. Yet he could not turn away from the library window. Far off, something glittered in the meadow. It was moonlight, flashing on a great glass. Perhaps the light said something. Perhaps it spoke in code. "I'll go there," thought Charles Holloway. "I won't go there." "I like it," he thought. "I don't like it. A moment later, the library door slammed. Going home, he passed the empty store window. Inside stood 2 abandoned sawhorses. Between lay a pool of water. In the water floated a few shards of ice. In the ice were a few long strands of hair. Charles Holloway saw but chose not to see. He turned and was gone. The street was soon as empty as the hardware store window. Far away, in the meadow, shadows flickered in the mirror maze, as if part of someone's life, yet unborn, were trapped there, waiting to be lived. So the maze waited, its cold gaze ready, for so much as a bird to come look, see, and fly away shrieking. But no bird came. Chapter 14, which is one of my favorite chapters, actually. 3, a voice said. Will listened, cold but warming, glad to be in with a roof above, floor below, a wall and a door between, too much exposure, too much freedom, too much night. 3. Dad's voice, home now, moving down the hall, speaking to itself. 3. Why? Thought Will. That's when the train came. Had Dad seen it? Heard? Followed? No, he mustn't. Will hunched himself. Why not? He trembled. What did he fear? The carnival rushing in like a black stampede of storm waves on the shore out below? Of him and Jim and Dad knowing? Of the town asleep not knowing? Was it that? Yes. Will buried himself deep. Yes. 3. 3 in the morning, thought Charles Holloway, seated on the edge of his bed. Why did the train come at that hour? For he thought, it's a special hour. Women never wake then, do they? They sleep the sleep of babes and children, but men in middle age, they know that hour well. Oh God, midnight's not so bad. You wake and go back to sleep. 1 or 2 is not bad. You toss but sleep again. 5 or 6 in the morning, there's hope, for dawn's just just under the horizon. But 3 now, Christ, 3 a.m. Doctors say the body's at low tide then, the soul is out. The blood moves slow. You're the nearest to death you'll ever be save dying. Sleep is a patch of death, but 3 in the morn, full wide-eyed staring is living death. You dream with your eyes open. God, if you had any strength to rouse up, you'd slaughter your half-dreams with buckshot, but no. You lie pinned to a deep well bottom that's burned dry. The moon rolls by to look at you down there with its idiot face. It's a long way back to sunset, and far away on to dawn. So you summon all the fool things of your life, the stupid lovely things done with people known so very well who are now so very dead. And wasn't it true? Had he read it somewhere? More people in hospitals die at 3 a.m. than any other time. Stop, he cried silently. Charlie? His wife said in her sleep. Slowly, he took off the other shoe. His wife smiled in her sleep. Why? She's immortal. She has a son. Your son, too. But what father ever really believes it? He carries no burden. He feels no pain. What man like woman lies down in darkness and gets up with child? The gentle, smiling ones own the good secret. Oh, what strange, wonderful clocks women are. They nest in time. They make the flesh that holds fast and binds eternity. They live inside the gift, no power except, and need not mention it. Why speak of time when you are time, and shape the universal moments as they pass into warmth and action? How men envy and often hate these warm clocks, these wives, who know they will live forever. So what do? We men turn terribly mean, because we can't hold on to the world, or ourselves, or anything. We are blind to continuity. All breaks down, falls, melts, stops, rots, or runs away. So since we cannot shape time, what does that leave men? Sleepless, staring. 3 a.m. That's our reward. 3 in the morn, the soul's midnight. The tide goes out, the soul ebbs, and a train arrives at an hour of despair. Why? Charlie? His wife's hand moved to his. You all right, Charlie? She drowsed. He did not answer. He could not tell her how he was. Chapter 15. The sun rose yellow as a lemon. The sky was round and blue. The birds looped clear water songs in the air. Will and Jim leaned from their windows. Nothing had changed, except the look in Jim's eyes. Last night, said Will. Did or didn't it happen? They both gazed toward the far meadows. The air was sweet as syrup, and they could find no shadows anywhere, even under the trees. 6 minutes, cried Jim. 5. 4 minutes later, cornflakes lurching in their stomachs, they frisked the leaves into a fine red dust going out of town. With a wild flutter of breath, they raised their eyes from the earth they had been treading, and the carnival was there. Hey. For the tents were lemon-like in the sun, brass like wheat fields a few weeks ago. Flags and banners bright as bluebirds snapped above lion-colored canvas. From booths painted cotton candy colors. Fine Saturday smells of bacon and eggs, hot dogs and pancakes swam the wind. Everywhere ran boys. Everywhere sleepy fathers followed. It's just a plain old carnival, said Will. Like heck, said Jim. We weren't blind last night. Come on. They marched 100 yards straight on and deep into the midway. And the deeper they went, the more obvious it became that they would find no nightmen cat-treading balloon shadow while strange tents plumed like thunderclouds. Instead, close up, the carnival was mildew rope, moth-eaten canvas, rain-worn, sun-bleached tinsel. The sideshow paintings hung like sad albatrosses on their poles, flapped and let fall flakes of ancient paint, shivering and at the same time revealing the unwondrous wonders of a thin man, fat man, needlehead, tattoo man, hula dancer. They prowled on, but found no mysterious midnight spheres of evil gas tied by mysterious oriental knots to daggers plunged into dark earth. No maniac ticket-takers bent on terrible revenges. The calliope by the ticket booth neither screamed deaths nor hummed idiot songs to itself. The train pulled off on a spur in the warming grass. It was old, yes, and welded tight with rust, but it looked like a titanic magnet that had collected it to itself. From locomotive boneyards across 3 continents, drive shafts, flywheels, smokestacks, and hand-me-down second-rate nightmares. It did not cut a black and mortuary silhouette. It asked permission but to lie dead in an autumn strewings. So much tired steam and iron gunpowder blowing away. Jim, Will! Here came Miss Folly, their 7th grade schoolteacher, along the midway, all smiles. Boys, she said, what's wrong? You look as if you lost something. Well, said Will, last night, did you hear that calliope? Calliope? No. Then why are you out here so early, Miss Foley? Asked Jim. I love carnivals, said Miss Foley, a little woman lost somewhere in her gray 50s beaming around. I'll buy hot dogs and you eat while I look for my fool nephew. You seen him? Nephew? Robert, staying with me a few weeks. Father's dead, mother's sick in Wisconsin. I took him in. He ran out here early today, said he'd meet me, but you know boys. My, you look glum. She shoved food at them. Eat, cheer up. Ride's open in 10 minutes. Meantime, I think I'll spy through that mirror maze and— No, said Will. No what? Asked Miss Foley. No mirror maze. Will swallowed. He stared at the fathoms of reflections. You could never strike bottom there. It was like winter standing tall, waiting to kill you with a glance. Miss Foley, he said at last, wondered to hear his mouth say it. Don't go in there. Why not? Why not? Jim peered fascinated into Will's face. Yeah, tell us. Why not? People get lost, Will said lamely. All the more reason. Robert might be wandering loose and not find his way out if I don't grab his ear. Never can tell, Will could not take his eyes off the millions of miles of blind glass. What might be swimming around in there? Swimming, Miss Foley laughed. What a lovely mind you have, Willie. Well, yes, but I'm an old fish, so... Miss Foley! Miss Foley waved, poised, took a step, and vanished into the mirror ocean. They watched as she settled, wandered, sank, deep, deep, and was finally dissolved, grey among silver. Jim grabbed Will. What was all that? Gosh, Jim, it's the mirrors. They're the only things I don't like. They're the only things like last night. Boy, you've been out in the sun, snorted Jim. That maze is... His voice trailed off. He sniffed the cold air blowing out as if from an ice house between the tall reflections. Jim, you were saying? But Jim said nothing. After a long time, he clapped his hand to the back of his neck. It really does, he cried in soft amaze. What does? Hair. I read it all my life in scary stories. It stands on end. Mine's doing it now. Gosh, Jim, so's mine. They stood entranced with the delicious cold bumps on their necks and the suddenly stiffened small hairs quilled up over their scalps. There was a flourish of light and shadow. Bumping out through the mirror maze, they saw 2, 4, a dozen Miss Foleys. They didn't know which one was real, so they waved to all of them. But none of the Miss Foleys saw or waved back. Blind she walked. Blind she tacked her nails to cold glass. Miss Foley! Her eyes, flexed white as if from blasts of photographic powder, were skinned white like a statue's. Deep under the glass she spoke. She murmured. She whimpered. Now she cried. Now she shouted. Now she yelled. She knocked the glass with her head. Her elbows, tilted, drunken as a light-blind moth, raised her hands in claws. Oh, God, help, she wailed. Help, oh, God! Jim and Will saw their own faces pale, their own eyes wide in the mirrors as they plunged. Miss Foley, here! Jim cracked his brow. This way! But Will found only cold glass. A hand flew from empty space, an old woman's hand, sinking for the last time. It seized anything to save itself. The anything was Will. She pulled him under. Will! Jim! Jim! And Jim held him, and he held her, and pulled her free of the silently rushing mirrors coming in from the desolate seas. They stepped into sunlight. Miss Foley, one hand to her bruised cheek, bleated, murmured, then laughed quickly, then gasped, and wiped her eyes. Thank you, Will, Jim. Oh, thank you. I'd have drowned. Oh, Will, you were right. My God, did you see her? She's lost, drowned in there, poor girl. Oh, the poor, lost, sweet. Save her. Oh, he must save her. Miss Foley, boy, you're hurting. Will firmly removed her fist from clenching the flesh of his arm. There's no one in there. I saw her, please. Look, save her. Will jumped to the mirror maze entrance and stopped. The ticket taker gave him an idle glance of contempt. Will backed away to Miss Foley. I swear, no one went in ahead of you or after you, ma'am. It's my fault. I joked about the water. You must have got mixed up, lost, and scared. But if she heard, she went on biting the back of her hand, her voice the voice of someone come out of the sea after no air, a long, dread time deep, no hope of life, now set free. Con? She's at the bottom, poor girl. I knew her. I know you, I said when I first saw her a minute ago. I waved, she waved. Hello, I ran. Bang! I fell, she fell. 12, 1,000 of her fell. Wait, I said. Oh, she looked so fine, so lovely, so young. But it scared me. What are you doing here? I said. Why, I think she said, I'm real. You're not. She laughed, way underwater. She ran off in the maze. We must find her before... Miss Foley, Will's arm around her, took a last trembling breath and grew strangely quiet. Jim was staring deep into those cold mirrors, looking for sharks that could not be seen. Miss Foley, he said, what did she look like? Miss Foley's voice was pale but calm. The fact is, she looked like myself, many, many years ago. I'll go home now, she said. Miss Foley will... No, stay. I'll be just fine. Have fun, boys. Enjoy. And she walked slowly away, alone, down the midway. Somewhere a vast animal made water. Ammonia made the wind turn ancient as it passed. "I'm leaving," said Will. "Will," said Jim, "we're staying until sundown." "Boy, dark, sundown, and figure it all. You chicken?" "No," murmured Will, "but anybody want to dive back in that maze?" Jim gazed fiercely into the bottomless sea, where now only the pure light glanced back at itself, held up emptiness upon emptiness beyond emptiness before their eyes. "Nobody." Jim let his heart beat twice. "I guess." Mm-hmm. Okay. Chapter 16. A bad thing happened at sunset. Jim vanished. Through noon and afternoon, they had screamed up half the rides, knocked over dirty milk bottles, smashed Cupid doll winning plates, smelling, listening, looking their way through the autumn crowd, trampling the leafy sawdust. And then, quite suddenly, Jim was gone. And Will, not asking anyone but himself, absolutely silent, certain sure, walked steadily through the late crowd as the sky was turning plum-colored, until he came to the maze and paid his dime and stepped inside and called softly just one time. "Jim?" And Jim was there, half in, half out of the cold glass tides, like someone abandoned on a seashore when a close friend has gone far out and there is wonder if he will ever come back. Jim stood as if he had not moved so much as an eyelash in 5 minutes, staring, his mouth half open, waiting for the next wave to come in and show him more. "Jim, get out of there!" "Will," Jim sighed faintly, "let me be." Like heck, with one leap, Will grabbed Jim's belt and hauled. Shuffling backwards, Jim did not seem to know he was being dragged from the maze, for he kept protesting in awe at some unseen wonder. "Oh, Will. Oh, Willie, Will. Oh, Willie." "Jim, you nut. I'm taking you home." "What? What?" They were in the cold air. The sky was darker than plums now, with a few clouds burning late sunfire above. The sunfire flamed on Jim's feverish cheeks, his open lips, his wide and terribly rich green shining eyes. Jim, what'd you see in there? The same as Miss Foley?" "What?" "I'm gonna bust your nose. Come on." He hustled, pulled, shoved, half carried this fever, this elation, this unstruggling friend. "Can't tell you, Will. Wouldn't believe. Can't tell you in there. Oh, in there. "Shut up!" Will socked his arm. "Scare heck out of me, just like she scares us. Bugs. It's almost supper time. Folks will think we're dead and buried." They were striding now, slashing the autumn grass with their shoes. Beyond the tents, in the hay-smelling leaf-mold fields, Will glaring at town, Jim staring back at the high, now darkening banners, as if the last of the sun hid under the earth. "Will, we gotta come back. Tonight." "Okay, come back alone." Jim stopped. "You wouldn't let me come alone. You're always going to be around, aren't you, Will? To protect me?" "Look who needs protection," Will laughed, and then did not laugh again, for Jim was looking at him, this last wild light dying in his mouth, and caught in the thin hollows of his nostrils, and in his suddenly deep-set eyes. "You'll always be with me, huh, Will?" Jim simply breathed warm upon him, and his blood stirred with the old familiar answers. Yes, you know it, yes. And turning together, they stumbled over a clanking dark mound of leather bag. Chapter 17. They stood for a long moment over the huge leather bag. Almost secretively, Will kicked it. It made a sound of iron indigestion. Why? Said Will. That belongs to the lightning sales rod man. Wow. That belongs to the lightning rod salesman. Jim slipped his hand through the leather mouth and hefted forth a heavy metal shaft clustered with chimeras, Chinese dragons, all fang, eyeball, and moss green armor, all cross and crescent, every symbol around the world that made men safe, or seemed to, clung here, grieving the boy's hands with odd weight and meaning. Storm never came, but he went. Where? And why leave his bag? They both looked to the carnival where dusk-colored canvas billows. Shadows ran coolly out to engulf them. People in cars honked home in tired commotions. Boys on skeleton bikes whistled dogs after. Soon night would own the midway, while shadows rode the Ferris wheels up to cloud the stars. People, said Jim, don't leave their whole life lying around. This was everything that old man owned. Something important. Jim breathed soft fire. Made him forget. So he just walked off and left this here. What? What's so important you forget everything? Why? Jim examined his friend curiously, twilight in his face. No one can tell you. You find out yourself. Mysteries and mysteries. Storm salesman's bag. If we don't look now, we might never know. Jim, in 10 minutes. Sure. Midway'll be dark. Everyone home for dinner. Just us alone. But wouldn't it feel great? Just us. And here we go back in. Passing the mirror maze, they saw two armies. A billion Jims, a billion Wills, collide, melt, vanish. Unlike those armies, so vanished the real army of people. The boys stood alone among the encampments of dusk, thinking of all the boys in town, sitting down to warm food in bright rooms. Chapter 18 is pretty long. Definitely do chapter 18. We'll see if I do. The next two chapters are pretty short, but we'll see if I do both of those. 12 to 20 is a pretty good run. Chapter 18. The letter sign said, "Out of order, keep off." Sign's been up all day. I don't believe signs, said Jim. They peered in at a merry-go-round, which lay under dry rattle and roar of wind-tumbled oak trees. Its horses, goats, antelopes, zebras, speared through their spines with brass javelins, hung contorted as in a death rictus, asking mercy with their fright-colored eyes, seeking revenge with their panic-colored teeth. Don't look broke to me. Jim ambled across the clanking chain, leaped to an eternable surface vast as the moon among the frantic but forever spelled beasts. Jim! Will, this is the only ride we haven't looked at. So, Jim swayed. The lunatic carousel world stirred a tilt with his lean bulk. He strolled through brass forests amidst animal rouse. He swung astride a plum dusk stallion. Oh boy, get! A man rose from machinery darkness. I should read that in a different voice. Oh boy, get! A man rose from machinery darkness. Jim! Reaching out from the shadows among the calliope tubes and moon-skin drums, a man hoisted Jim, yelling, out on the air. Help! Will, help! Will leaped through the animals. The man smiled easily, welcomed him handily, swung him high beside Jim. They stared down at bright flame-red hair, bright flame-blue eyes, and rippling biceps. Out of order, said the man. Can't you read? Put them down, said a gentle voice. Hung high, Jim and Will glanced over at a second man, standing tall beyond the chains. Down, he said again, and they were carried through the brass forest of wild but uncomplaining brutes and set in the dust. We were, said Will, curious. The second man was as tall as a lamp-post. His pale face, lunar pockmarks denting it, cast light on those who stood below. His vest was the color of fresh blood. His eyebrows, his hair, his suit were licorice black, and the sun-yellow gem which stared from the tie-pin thrust in his cravat was the same unblinking shade and bright crystal as his eyes. But in this instant, swiftly and with utter clearness, it was the suit which fascinated Will, for it seemed woven of boar bramble, clock-spring hair, bristle, and every sort of ever-trembling, ever-glistening dark hemp. The suit caught light and stirred like a bed of black tweed thorns, intermittently itching, covering the man's long body with motion, so it seemed he should excruciate, cry out, and tear the clothes free. Yet here he stood, moon calm, inhibiting his itchweed suit and watching Jim's mouth with his yellow eyes. He never once looked at Will. The name is Dark. He flourished a white calling card. It turned blue. Whisper. Red. Whisk. A green man dangled from a tree, stamped on the card. Flit. Shh. Dark. And my friend with the red hair here is Mr. Cougar, of Cougar and Darks. Flip, flick, shh. Names disappeared on the white square. Combined shadow shows. Tick, wash. A mushroom which stirred mouldering herb pots. And Cross-Continental Pandemonium Theatre Company. He handed the card to Jim. It now read, Our speciality, to examine oil polish and repair Death Watch beetles. Calmly, Jim read it. Calmly, Jim put a fist into his copious and richly treasured pockets, rummaged and held out his hand. On his palm lay a dead brown insect. Here, said Will, fix this. Mr. Dark exploded his laugh. Superb! I will. He extended his hand, his shirt sleeve pulled up. Bright purple, black, green, and lightning blue eels, worms, and Latin scrolls slid to view on his wrist. Boy, cried Will, you must be the tattooed man. No, Will studied the stranger. The illustrated man. There's a difference. Mr. Dark nodded, pleased. What's your name, boy? Don't tell him, thought Will, and stopped. Why not, he wondered. Why? Jim's lips hardly twitched. Simon, he said. He smiled to show it was a lie. Mr. Dark smiled to show he knew it. Want to see more? Simon. Jim would not give him the satisfaction of a nod. Slowly, with great mouth-working pleasure, Mr. Dark pushed his sleeve high to his elbow. Jim stared. The arm was like a cobra, weaving, bobbing, swaying to strike. Mr. Dark clenched his fist, wriggled his fingers. The muscles danced. Will wanted to run around and see, but could only watch, thinking, Jim, oh, Jim. For there stood Jim, and there was this tall man, each examining the other as if he were a reflection in a shop window late at night. The tall man's brambled suit shadowed out now to color Jim's cheeks, and storm over his wide and drinking eyes with a look of rain instead of the sharp cat green they always were. Jim stood like a runner who has come a long way, fever in his mouth, hands open to receive any gift. And right now, it was the gift of pictures twitched in pantomime, as Mr. Dark made his illustrations jerk cold-skinned over his warm-pulsed wrists as the stars came out above, and Jim stared, and Will could not see. And a long way off, the last of the town people went away toward town in their warm cars, and Jim said faintly, Gosh, and Mr. Dark rolled down his sleeve. Show's over. Supper time. Carnival's shut up until 7. Everyone out. Come back, Simon, and ride the merry-go-round when it's fixed. Take this card. Free ride. Jim stared at the hidden wrist and put the card in his pocket. So long. Jim ran. Will ran. Jim whirled, glanced back, leaped, and for the second time in an hour vanished. Will looked up into the tree, where Jim squirmed on a limb, hidden. He looked back. Mr. Dark and Mr. Cougar were turned away, busy with the merry-go-round. Quick, Will! Jim? They'll see you! Jump! Will jumped. Jim hauled him up. The great tree shook. A wind roared by in the sky. Jim helped him cling, gasping among the branches. Jim, we don't belong here. Shut up! Look, whispered Jim. Somewhere on the carousel machinery were taps and brass knockings, a faint squeal and a whistle of calliope steam. What was on his arm, Jim? A picture. Yeah, but what kind? It was... Jim shut his eyes. It was a picture of a snake. That's it. Snake. When he opened his eyes, he would not look at Will. Okay, if you don't want to tell me. I told you, Will, a snake. I'll get him to show it to you later. You want that? No, thought Will. I don't want that. He looked down at the billion footprints left in the sawdust on the empty midway, and suddenly it was a lot closer to midnight than to noon. I'm going home. Sure, Will, go on. Mere mazes, old teacher ladies, lost lightning rod bags, lightning rod salesmen disappear. Snake pictures, dancing, unbroken merry-go-rounds. You want to go home? Sure, old friend, Will. So long. Will stared down the tree and froze. All clear? Cried a voice below. Clear, someone shouted at the far end of the midway. Mr. Dark moved, not 50 feet away, to a control box near the merry-go-round ticket booth. He glared in all directions. He glared into that tree. Will hugged, Jim hugged the limb, tightened into smallness. Start up! With a pop, a bang, a jangle of reins, a lift and downfall, a rise and descent of brass, the carousel moved. But, thought Will, it's broke, out of order. He flicked a glance at Jim, who pointed wildly down. The merry-go-round was running, yes, but it was running backward. The small calliope inside the carousel machinery rattle-snapped its nervous stallion shivering drums, clashed its harvest moon cymbals, toothed its castanets, and throatily choked, and sobbed its reeds, whistles, and baroque flutes. The music, thought Will. It's backwards, too. Mr. Dark jerked about, glanced up as if he had heard Will's thought. A wind shook the trees in black tumults. Mr. Dark shrugged and looked away. The carousel wheeled faster, shrieking, plunging, going roundabout back. Now Mr. Cougar, with his flaming red hair and fire-blue eyes, was pacing the midway, making a last check. He stood under their tree. Will could have let spit down on him. Then the calliope made a peculiar, violent cry of foul murder, which made dogs howl in far countries. And Mr. Cougar, spinning, ran and leaped on the back-whirling universe of animals, who, tail first, head last, pursued an endless circling night toward unfound and never-to-be-discovered destinations. Hand-slapping brass poles, he flung himself into a seat where his bristly red hair, pink face, and incredible sharp blue eyes, he sat silent, going back around, the music squealing swift back, with him like insucked breath. The music, thought Will. What is it? And how do I know it's backside first? He hugged the limb, tried to catch the tune, then hum it forward in his head. But the brass bells, the drums, hammered his chest, revved his heart so he felt his pulse reverse. His blood turned back in perverse thrusts so that his flesh, through all his flesh, so that he was nearly shaken free to fall. So that all he did was clutch, hang pale, and drink the sight of all the drink the sight of the backward turning machine and Mr. Dark alert at the controls on the sidelines. It was Jim who first noticed the new thing happening, for he kicked Will once. Will looked over and Jim nodded frantically at the man in the machine. As he came around the next time, Mr. Cougar's face was melting like pink wax. His hands were becoming doll hands. His bones sank away beneath his clothes. His clothes then shrank down to fit his dwindling frame. His face flickered, going, and each time around he melted more. Will saw Jim's head shifting, circling. The carousel wheeled, a great back-drifting lunar dream, the horses thrusting, the music in gasp after, while Mr. Cougar, as simple as shadows, as simple as light, as simple as time, got younger and younger and younger. Each time he wheeled to view, he sat alone with his. Each time he wheeled to view, he sat alone with his bones, each time shaped like warm candles burning away to tender years. He gazed serenely at the fiery constellations, the children inhabited trees, which went away from him as he removed himself from them, and his nose diminished, and his sweet wax ears reshaped themselves into small pink roses. Now no longer 40 where he had begun his back spiral journey, Mr. Cougar was 19. Around went the reverse parade of horse, pole, music, man become young man fast rendered down to boy. Mr. Cougar was 17. 16. Another and another time around under the sky and trees, and Will whispering, Jim counting the times around, while the night air warmed to summer heat by friction of sun metal brass. The passionate, back-turned flight of beasts wore the wax doll down and washed him clean with still, stranger musics until all ceased. All died away to stillness. The calliope shut up its brassworks. The ironmongery machines hissed off. And with a last faint whine like desert sands blown back up Arabian hourglasses, the carousel rocked on its seaweed waters and stood still. The figure seated in the carved white wooden sleigh chair was very small. Mr. Cougar was 12 years old. No, Will's mouth shaped the word. No, Jim's did the same. The small shape stepped down from the silent world, its face in shadow, but its hands, newborn, wrinkled pink, held out in raw carnival lamplight. Probably have to stop after this because I keep screwing up words. The strange man-boy shot his gaze upward, down, smelling fright somewhere, terror and awe in the vicinity. Will balled himself tight and shut his eyes. He felt the terrible gaze shoot through the leaves like blown needle darts, pass on. Then, rabbit running, the small shape lit off down the empty midway. Jim was the first to stir the leaves aside. Mr. Dark was gone too, in the evening hush. It seemed to take Jim forever to fall down to earth. Will fell after, and they both stood, clamorous with alarms, shaken by concussions of silent pantomime, blasted by events all the more numbing because they ran off into night unknown. And it was Jim who spoke from their mutual confusion and trembling as each held to the other's arm, seeing the small shadow rush, luring them across the meadow. Oh, Will, I wish we could go home. I wish we could eat, but it's too late. We got to see more, don't we? Lord, said Will miserably. I guess we do. And they ran together, following they didn't know what, and out, on, out, and away, to who could possibly guess where. Yeah, I think I'm going to end there before I lose my voice and also keep screwing up words. Yeah, that was chapters 12 through 18. So, yeah, we're making pretty good progress, I think. I will see you all next time.